In the exclusive hills of Malibu, silence wasn't peace, it was protection. And in the fortress of the most feared man on the West Coast, Mick Russo, silence was ready for the shock. This is a story of revenge hidden in plain sight. Drop your city below and let me know where you're watching from. My name is Sarah Jennings. To the shady Los Angeles agency that hired me, I was just a maid. To the crime boss who lived here, I was a ghost. But inside, I was a weapon. I was the woman Mick Russo had destroyed 7 years ago, and he didn't even know he had invited his own reckoning into his home. She moved through the estate, scrubbing the dust of wealth and power. She was barely 23, yet her eyes held the exhaustion of a veteran operative and the burning rage of a grieving wife. She was hired to clean, cook, and, above all, be unheard. The air chilled the moment Mick Russo entered his study. He didn't have to shout. His presence, a blend of tailored authority and coiled threat, was an insult to calm. He stood over Sarah, his shadow dominating the polished floor, dismissing her with a cold glance. "You're the new cleaner, Sarah." He said the name like it was temporary, disposable. "You see this house? My mother, Elizabeth, runs it, and she has one rule that is non-negotiable." He pointed sharply at the photo of Elizabeth. "My mother is deaf, completely. If you make a sound that disturbs her, you're out. If you make a mistake near her, you're worse than out. Understand?" Sarah, eyes locked on his, gave a single, imperceptible nod. She was terrified, yet electric with purpose. The rage of years was finally breathing the same air as her target. She had signed up for silence, but her heart was screaming for revenge. And Mick Russo was about to find out that the truly silent often hide the loudest, most devastating secrets. I spent the next 3 days moving around Elizabeth Russo like a shadow. Mick's mother. I was here to spy on her, to map out her contacts. But the truth I found wasn't a criminal mastermind. It was a woman, drowning in silence. She was elegant, her silver hair coiled perfectly, yet her eyes held a terrible, magnificent loneliness. Elizabeth communicated with the household only through a small, smooth slate and a piece of chalk she kept strapped to her wrist. The servants treated her with a mixture of distant respect and fear, rarely making eye contact. To them, she was the silent queen of a dangerous domain. To me, she was a tragedy waiting to happen. One gloomy afternoon, as a typical Malibu coastal fog rolled in, I found Elizabeth by her indoor hydroponic garden, an absurdly expensive hobby. She was pointing desperately at a rare purple flower, a tricertis, trying to write its name on the slate. She drew the petals, scratched out the clumsy Latin, and sighed in pure frustration, her hands shaking slightly. I was supposed to clean the glass panels. I was supposed to remain a ghost. But that look, the simple, raw frustration of being unable to share a moment of beauty, shattered my professional resolve. It reminded me of my own mother years ago, struggling to describe something simple to a dismissive doctor in New York City. Before I could stop myself, my hands moved, not to clean, but to speak. I stepped forward, slowly raising my hands. My fingers moved with the speed and grace of years of practice, forming the specific shape and motion for the flower's name in perfect American Sign Language. Elizabeth Russo froze. Her face, usually a mask of control, cracked with pure astonishment. Her eyes, the only part of her that could truly express, locked onto mine. They weren't angry, they were searching. She signed back, her hands moving hesitantly, asking the simplest, most human question. How? I gave a silent, sad smile. In that moment, the mission, the revenge, the walls of the mansion, it all dissolved. We were two people who shared a secret language, a language the man who owned the house, the man who owned my grief, didn't know existed. Just as the warmth of connection began to bloom between us, a security camera, mounted subtly on the ceiling, rotated, its tiny red eye blinking once. The cold reality of the Bellwether estate had just taken note of my betrayal of silence. After that first sign, the floodgates opened. For Elizabeth, ASL wasn't just communication, it was freedom. For me, it was a covert intelligence operation. I learned her rhythms, how her signs sped up when Mick was out of state, how they softened when she talked about her past in Atlanta, Georgia. Every graceful movement of her fingers was a data point. The code, I suspected, wasn't a separate language, but a hidden grammar, a pattern woven into the most mundane requests. Was the sign for tea a trigger? Was the sign for garden a location? I was mapping the architecture of a mafia communication network, one trembling hand gesture at a time. This secret life filled the days. I'd sign a request for a cleaning product, and she'd respond with a sign that felt almost scheduled. I began cross-referencing her signs with mixed travel dates and the sudden arrival of expensive cars from Miami. The patterns were too perfect, too disciplined. Elizabeth was an unwitting switchboard for the Russo operation. One rainy Tuesday, that kind of day where the silence of the mansion felt oppressive, Elizabeth asked me for help hanging a decorative tapestry in the grand ballroom. As I held the heavy fabric, she signed, telling me which spot to aim for. Then, her eyes darted to the empty hallway, and her hands moved low, hidden momentarily by the tapestry. The signs were sharp, urgent, and professional, not the flowing poetry she usually used. You know the code? The shock was physical. The simple question was delivered with the precision of a drill sergeant. She wasn't testing me on a flower this time. She was asking me if I understood the mechanics of her criminal duty. I forced my expression into one of indistinct confusion, signing back the universal query, "What?" Elizabeth's face crumpled. The sudden fear in her eyes was heartbreaking. She shook her head fiercely, signing, "Never mind," and quickly averted her gaze, her hand moving automatically to her slate, scrubbing the chalk marks of a previous note with nervous energy. As she retreated, pretending to be distracted, I scanned the vast, ornate room. My gaze landed on an antique oil lamp tucked into a shadowed corner. It was a beautiful piece, but something was wrong. The wiring wasn't for light. It was connected to a sophisticated miniaturized lens. I knew then that Mick wasn't just worried about sound. She didn't know the cameras were recording everything. The house wasn't just silent, it was watching. And in that surveillance, my active empathy, the one that had won Elizabeth's trust, was now evidence that could shatter my cover and my chance at revenge. The blinking red light in the corner of the ballroom wasn't a surprise. I'd located at least a dozen covert cameras throughout the estate, each one meticulously disguised as antique lamps, air vents, or even the eyes of ancient busts. The bellwether wasn't a home, it was a high-tech panopticon. And Elizabeth Russo, isolated by her deafness, was the unwitting heart of its surveillance. My fingers flew across the secure tablet, a device far more sophisticated than anything a housemaid would own. I typed out a concise report, encrypting it before sending. My name isn't just Sarah Jennings, the grieving widow. It's also Nightingale, badge number 72 Alpha, operating for a clandestine federal unit based out of Washington, D.C. We specialized in impossible targets. Mick Russo was at the top of that list. His criminal empire stretched from the docks of New Orleans to the penthouses of Chicago, all seemingly orchestrated without a single traceable phone call. My handlers had suspected Elizabeth was the conduit. My ASL training, a skill I'd learned years ago to connect with a neff neighbor, made me the perfect, if desperate, choice. The agency had planted me here, not to clean, but to listen, to watch, to decipher the elaborate network of communication Elizabeth unknowingly ran for her son. And I had succeeded. The red schedule was a genius of a system, a series of specific ASL signs for mundane items, a certain type of tea, a gardening tool, the timing of a tapestry hanging. It was all hidden in plain sight, in the quiet ballet of a deaf woman's hands. Confirmed, the red schedule was active. The final piece of evidence I needed wasn't on a database, it was physical, something they suspected Elizabeth kept close, a small, hidden ledger. Tonight was the night. I slipped into Elizabeth's private sitting room. The room smelled faintly of antique lace and dried lavender. My target was an ornate bronze jewelry box, a relic that sat prominently on her dressing table. It was heavy, anchored by years of sentiment or secrets. The tumbler clicked once, then twice. The lid hissed open, revealing a velvet-lined interior. I didn't see a ledger. I saw diamonds, emeralds, and a collection of delicate old photographs bound by a faded satin ribbon. Disappointment was quickly replaced by a cold dread. I ignored the jewelry and pulled out the ribbon-bound packet. The first few photos were mundane. Elizabeth posing stiffly at a garden party in Palm Beach, Florida. Another of her teaching sign language to a small group of children in Miami. But the fifth photo. I flipped the photo over. The handwriting was Elizabeth's. A looping, elegant script. It wasn't a family caption. It was a note. My boys, Jonathan and Michael, 1998. My breath hitched. Jonathan. Jonathan Hayes. My husband. The man who had vanished 7 years ago during a business trip connected to a Russo rival family in Phoenix, Arizona. Jonathan wasn't just linked to the Russos, he was Mick's brother. The shock turned my legs to lead. My husband, the man I was trying to avenge, was the forgotten son of this crime family. Mick hadn't just killed my husband, he'd erased him and taken his place at the head of the empire. The pieces clicked into a horrific mosaic. A brother erased, an identity stolen, a mother trapped. My shaking fingers fumbled with the final document in the box tucked beneath a layer of silk. A marriage certificate, yellowed and fragile, from a small courthouse in Atlanta, Georgia. I forced my eyes onto the names. Groom, Jonathan Hayes. Bride, my true maiden name. Used years before I met Jonathan. Sarah Jennings. A wave of recognition and devastation washes over Sarah's face. I wasn't just investigating the man who killed my husband. I was hiding under a fake name in the house of my brother-in-law, the identity thief, the pretender. I was a spy who had just discovered she was already family. My professional mission had dissolved into a purely personal war. I looked down at the horrifying evidence, the photo, the certificate. Jonathan was smiling in the picture, standing beside a proud Elizabeth. But there was one last piece of evidence scrawled on the back of that same photograph. A note made much more recently, a note in Elizabeth's shaky hand that simply read, "My other son, before the change." Just as the weight of this truth made the room spin, a sound, not a subtle creak, but a solid cold thud, came from directly behind me. The door to Elizabeth's sitting room had just been closed, silently, from the outside. A wave of cologne, sharp and expensive, hit me. I spun around, heart hammering, but it was too late. A cold, heavy hand clamped down on my shoulder. "You've been asking too many questions, Sarah." He was home. He was standing right behind me, and his eyes were fixed not on my face, but on the open box. Mick Russo whispered directly into my ear, the sound both intimate and terrifying. "You were hired to be silent, Sarah, but you and my mother have been speaking. I had the surveillance tapes reviewed for the last week, paying special attention to the noise you weren't making." He pulled back, his eyes boring into mine, his lips curled into a terrifying smirk. He knew about the ASL. He didn't just catch me, he had lured me. "Tell me, what story did my mother's hands tell you?" I was alone with the man who stole my name and my life, trapped in the darkness of his mother's room, knowing a secret that could destroy his empire, and he was waiting for me to speak. If you were Sarah, what is the one thing you would say right now to survive? Let us know in the comments and keep watching to see what happens next. Sarah is still pinned against Mick's wall. He's waiting for her answer, his eyes burning. I had one chance. I couldn't mention Jonathan, the certificate, or the agency. My only weapon was the emotional truth. Sarah, looking Mick straight in the eye, her voice trembling but steady. "Your mother told me she's lonely, that she misses the sun, that she's afraid of silence. That's the only story her hands tell anyone here, Mick." His eyes flickered with confusion, then pain, a true emotional spike. He was prepared for a lie about the code, not the truth about his mother's heart. Mick Russo: "Lies! She has everything! She has me!" Sarah: "She has your silence, Mick, just like everyone else in this house." Just as the emotional tension reached its peak, a sound broke through the silence, the rhythmic clicking of Elizabeth Russo's cane. She stood at the doorway, framed by the light from the main hall, her expression a mix of immediate concern and growing terror. She had seen the confrontation. She moved quickly to Mick, her hands already flying into rapid, urgent ASL. "What are you doing? Let her go, you promise." Mick instantly released Sarah, turning his full attention to his mother. He signed back just as fiercely, his face contorted with anger, fear, and a desperate love. "She knows too much. I found her in your box. I have to send her away or they'll come for us." Sarah watched, translating the silent, devastating family fight. Elizabeth signed a powerful denial, tears streaming silently down her face. "They are already here. You are making the same mistake again. Do not hurt her." Mick grabbed Sarah's arm, pulling her not back towards the main hall, but toward a concealed, unmarked utility door near the pantry. His grip was urgent, but this time it felt like a move of desperate protection, not violence. Mick Russo whispered directly into her ear and said, "You need to run, now. Get out of Malibu. They're coming for us both. I didn't mean to keep him, but I needed to keep her safe." He shoved her roughly through the hidden door and into the cold night air of the service alley. The words, "they're coming for us both," and the impossible rushed reference to his brother confirmed his complicated guilt and sparked the first flicker of his redemption. Before Sarah could process the truth, the sound of high-powered car engines rounding the corner, combined with the wail of distant sirens, sliced through the night. It wasn't just Mick's enemies, it was the authorities, or worse, and they were closing in fast. Sarah staggering into the cold night air of the service alley outside the Bellwether estate. The wail of sirens is closing fast, growing louder over the hills of Malibu. Sarah. He shoved me into the night. Michael Russo, the man who had stolen my identity, my husband's life, and my peace, had just saved me. His words echoed in the cold air. I didn't mean to keep him, but I needed to keep her safe. It wasn't a confession of love. It was a fractured glimpse into a soul corrupted by fear, the ultimate secret of the mafia boss. I didn't run towards the street. I pressed myself against the hedge, my eyes locked in the hidden door. The sirens were now deafening, not local police, but the heavy, unmarked vehicles of a federal raid. My unit was here. The red schedule was finished. Just then, the service door burst open. It wasn't Mick. It was Elizabeth Russo. She was disheveled, her face etched with panic, her hands signing frantically in the darkness. "Go! They're looking for you, for me. He told me to tell you the flower. The trichortis means betrayal." Elizabeth pointed with desperate urgency down the winding path, then turned back towards the house just as the first shadow of an operative rounded the corner. She chose her son over escape. I ran. As I sprinted down the driveway, the estate lights suddenly blazed, illuminating the chaos. I risked one final glance back. Mick Russo was standing defiantly in the main hall doorway, silhouetted against the bright light, his arms outstretched, surrendering or protecting his mother. Sarah. I had come for revenge. I found a truth far more complicated. Mick was a monster, yes, but he was also a desperate brother who had paid the ultimate price to shield his mother. He had tried to become the perfect son, but in doing so, he destroyed 2 lives. The story of the shy housemaid was finished, but the story of Sarah Jennings, the operative, the wife, and the avenger had only just begun. I left the Bellwether estate in flames, carrying the weight of Mick's secret and Elizabeth's warning. The code was broken, but my heart was broken worse. Sometimes, love finds us in the ashes of our mistakes. I turned my back on the silence, but the man I hated gave me back the chance to live. He turned to her and said, "To be continued."